Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Alessi. I'm a tutor with Ibis Prep, and we're going to be talking about contracts for the Uniform Bar Exam, February 2026. So contracts are, something that we run into every single day in our life, but when it's tested on the UBE, there's specific things that I feel like would be helpful for test takers when they're looking at contracts as a topic as a whole. Contracts is one of those topics for the Uniform Bar Exam that just has such a wide range of subject material, that it's a little bit overwhelming to look at it all at once. So I think in the context of taking a MEE contracts, which is the essay portion on the UBE, again, for the UBE, you have six MEEs, each are 30 minutes to take them. So when you're opening your book and you see an MEE contracts, there are only certain things that they can ask you before it gets a little bit too repetitive, right? So yes, there is a wide range of volume and things to learn and black letter law to memorize. But on your MEE, you'll typically get something that's about formation, right? So there's a party that is giving an offer, a party that's accepting the offer. There has to be valid consideration. Is there defenses to that formation? Is there defenses to why this contract cannot be enforceable? You'll have a lot of questions asking you about that, and you'll be able to pick that up because you'll see party A is talking to party B about wanting to do something. There's consideration exchanged, money or services, and then something will go wrong, right? So someone fails to perform, someone doesn't give the money over, and then we get into performance and breach, right? So our MEE is going to talk about, party A isn't able to deliver the goods on time. Party A doesn't paint the house. Whatever the facts of your MEE will tell you, it'll be about performance and breach, right? And there'll be certain rules, whether we're in common law or UCC, about how we talk about to our grader when we're typing our MEE, how we talk about breach. And then after a breach occurs, we need to award damages to to the non-breaching party, right? So the innocent party or the non-breaching party that was supposed to get the benefit of the bargain, or supposed to get something from this transaction, now is at a loss, right? So they didn't get their house painted, they didn't get the goods on time. How do we award damages to specific parties, right? And then with that said, parties always have a duty to mitigate their damages, right? So that it's kind of I don't want to say math based, but there is at the most addition and subtraction that you might have to do on your MEE. I know lawyers hate math, but it's not the end of the world. It's typically like expectation of a fully formed contract is $100,000, plus incidental of $20,000 for the cost of storing the goods that were not delivered, plus consequential, I lost that deal with this prospective buyer in the future, and it was known before we entered into the contract, and I was supposed to make $50,000 from that, right? So you add 100 plus 20 plus 50. Hopefully we can all do that. And then that's the damages that you award the innocent or non-breaching party. Obviously, I'm being, a little bit general with what your MEE might say. And yes, the bar exam is difficult, and your MEE will have a lot of different facts that are thrown at you. But I think if you look at your MEE as digestible information, where I'm reading the facts, and when I issue spot certain topics, I'm happy that I issue spotted it, right? When I see an offer, an acceptance and consideration, I'm going to type my black letter law out of what the definition of an offer, acceptance and consideration is, and we'll go through it. But the point is, when you're looking at an MEE that's very complex, where parties are doing crazy things and there's a lot of nuances, and they told something to someone on the phone, but then they wrote it in a memorandum. Right, that's like the contracts MEE we all know and love is there's a telephone and then there's a memo sent. Is that confirmatory memo with merchants? Maybe. But typically, you can break down the craziness by small issue spotting for specific things, right? So if I see a word or a definition, I'm going to issue spot that and then I'll talk about it to my grader. And that is my rule, right? So when we're writing a MEE, we're doing IRAC, issue, rule, analysis, and conclusion. So my issue is the prompt at the bottom, right? So was there a valid contract? A lot of the times that's the issue. I'll just spit that back out. The issue is, was there a valid contract when the parties entered into this agreement? right? And what is my rule? Well, then I look at Bob and Sally contracting with each other and crazy things are happening, but I don't care. I'm going to talk about an offer is blah, blah, blah. Etc. Acceptance is blah, blah, blah. Consideration is blah, blah, blah. And if I have a statute of frauds problem, if I have third-party beneficiaries, if I have the perfect tender rule breach, whatever I have, I talk about the black letter law, right? That's all in my rule part of my MEE, which is very important to learn the black letter law, right? So a lot of the things on these slides are all going to be about memorization of these definitions. And yes, it's a lot. It's a large volume, like I said, but the great thing is that you have a lot of time before test day to memorize that. So how do you memorize? You type it out on your computer, right? So typically when people take the UBE, they're typing it. They're typing their MEE section. And you're going to want to make sure that you don't have keyboard block that day. So you can recall from the top of your head, what is the definition of the statute of frauds, right? What is the definition of a modifications for UCC, right? What does that need? What's the differences between common law and UCC? Whatever I'm issue spotting, I should be able to have those definitions at the top of my head so that I can basically type out my MEE before I even get to my facts, right? And so what are the random facts in my MEE, that goes to my analysis, right? So I already put my rules down because I can issue spot things that are happening. But then when I get to the actual analysis, I have to pull the facts into here, right? So I'm talking about, the statute of frauds, things cannot be said. Things that are said orally must be conformed to a writing if it's a valid contract, if certain things are coming up, if certain conditions are met. And then for my analysis part, I'll say here, Bob and Ann talked on the phone. Therefore, it is subject to statute of frauds. However, a memo was sent 10 days later. Therefore, it takes it out of the statute of frauds, right? Whatever my analysis says, that's when I bring in the parties to my analysis part of the MEE. And then I conclude, right? So sometimes things are gray on the MEE and you can conclude differently than the person next to you, and that's totally fine. But the majority of your points are going to come from your memorization of the black letter law and the ability to pull the facts from the MEE and apply them to the rules that you just put down, right? So that's why the rules are so important to get on the paper, because if you get overwhelmed with your facts, just apply them to the rules that you already wrote down, right? You see the definition of statute of frauds. So pull from your facts of what the parties did or didn't do that you can then say they followed statute of frauds or they didn't, right? And when we get into it, it'll be a little bit more easier to visualize what I'm saying. But that in a nutshell is how you should approach MEE, where I'm looking at issue spots. All these PowerPoints that we go through are going to be little issue spots for us to eventually find in our MEE. Because when we open up our book, our MEE, unfortunately, is not going to tell you this is a contracts MEE about parole evidence, right? It's not going to say that. We're going to have to see what the parties are doing to then correctly issue spot. And we know all the definitions in our head because we studied for so long that we can just type it out without even thinking, right? We're going to save our thinking for the fact pulling into our analysis because we don't know what the facts are going to be on the MEE. We do know what parole evidence is because that won't change. And if our contract's MEE says that, we're going to put that down. But the facts in our MEE are going to be different. Every single test, they're not going to have repeated MEEs. So that is where I think you should save your brain power to make some valid arguments. This party will say this party will say this, right? The seller will argue this, the buyer will then argue this. It's okay to say both sides until you conclude, right? You have to pick a conclusion, even if it's incorrect. In the grader's mind, even if it's incorrect, you'll still get points. But typically your MEE will kind of funnel you into picking the overall correct answer, right? Okay, so with that said, a contract is an offer, an acceptance, and consideration. No valid defenses to that. And then the parties are supposed to do what they're supposed to do, right? But typically in ME, that doesn't happen. So when you open up your book and you have the parties talking with one another, what is the contract's purpose, right? This PowerPoint just gives the basic differences, but we'll get into it in a later PowerPoint. But basically, you have two universes of facts of law. So you have common law and you have UCC. As soon as I open up my MEE and I see a contract for real estate services, that includes employment, right? And what is a service? I want you to come and paint my house. I want you to do contract work on my house. I want you to redo my driveway. Those are all services, right? I want you to tutor my child for math. That would be a service. That's under common law, especially when you're buying a house. Any real property transactions are all common law. UCC deals with goods. So we are selling an item, we're transacting for 100 staplers. Anything that is movable or tangible is a good, right? And that's a definition that we can put in our MEE. As soon as we see goods, what are goods, movable and tangible items, so that our grader knows that we know what a good is and why UCC applies to goods. Even though this is kind of like the first thing we always ask ourselves, it's the most important thing to ask ourselves because there will be rules for only common law and there's rules for only UCC. So if you issue spot correctly and you know you're in common law, great. I don't have to even think about all my Article 2 UCC rules. I only need to think about common law. So it actually helps our brains file things away when we don't really need them at this present moment when we're doing this MEE on common law, and we can only focus on common law, right? And that's why I kind of love contracts because you can do a lot of separation, right? We're separating common law and UCC. We're separating this is a formation issue, this is a defense issue. We're separating this is performance slash breach, this is damages, right? So there's a lot of structure to a contract's MEE. But basically, if you had two at the same time, right? You have something for services and you have something for goods. How would that work? I am buying a car from you, but I also need you to fix the radio, right? The radio is broken in the car. When you have something like that, where buying a car would be buying a good, that would fall under UCC, but then fixing a radio, doing a services, would probably be under common law, right? So what do you do there? You do the predominant purpose test. The predominant purpose test you're going to want to say in your black letter law when you see that is one of the issues. And how would you know that's an issue spot? When they talk a lot about it, right? So if they're just glossing over the fact of something, maybe that's not something that they want you to hone in on. But if your facts really push the part of, well, they're trying to get a car sold, but they also have to do the services thing, and they're, scheduling part to do service, whatever your facts might say, the predominant purpose test will probably be something that you have to think about there, where what is the predominant purpose that we entered into this transaction? If it's in that scenario that I just mentioned with the car and the radio, the purpose is to buy a car. Yes, the radio is broken, and maybe it's the car dealerships just helping this prospective buyer to get the radio fixed. That's nice. But the predominant purpose is to buy the car. So UCC would apply in that situation. If the predominant purpose is for a service where I want you to paint my house, but also can you buy me two paint buckets so that I can patch it up while you're gone. After you're done painting my house, I want to patch it. The predominant purpose is a service. I want you to paint my house. I also want you to maybe buy another paint bucket while you're at it, which is a good, but the predominant purpose is for a service. So if that's true, I would apply common law. Okay. So that's the first issue that when you're looking at an MEE, you want to talk about, is this common law or is this UCC? And if it's a mix of both, predominant purpose test, right? That should be everyone's little paragraph in the beginning. That will give you a lot of points if you can really pull the definitions of common law contracts are these and UCC contracts are these. Would really help your grader understand that you know what you're talking about, right? And again, your grader at the end of the day is just an attorney that is looking at 1 billion essays every day and they're tired. They want to look at an essay that is structured very well, that takes out all the question marks, where I know what area of law I'm in, I know what universe of either common law or UCC I'm in, and I know the facts that apply. Your grader will thank you and will probably, mark you as higher points than the other person. So the definitions of these offers, acceptance, and considerations are something that we need to just have to memory. So an offer is a present intent to be bound with reasonably definite terms communicated to the offeree, right? So it creates a power of acceptance to the offeree. Offers can be terminated. They can be revoked, right? So I can give you an offer. Do you want to buy my house for $200,000? But then I can revoke my offer if something changes. I don't actually want you to buy my house, right? So just know where we are in contracts world. Am I revoking an offer or am I trying to terminate an existing contract, right? So that's a lot of practice that comes with it is to know where we are in contracts when certain rules are applying. So mere inquiries are not counter offers. Okay, so counter offers might come into place, especially with the mirror image rule with common law, where if I give you an offer, the acceptance has to perfectly mirror image that offer, or else it's treated as a rejection and a counteroffer. So keep in mind that a revocation is done by the offeror. The offeror, the person giving the offer, can revoke their offer. However, the offeree, the person receiving the offer, can reject the offer, right? So just know your terminology here. But would you consider perhaps you would do things that are mere inquiry words are not a counter offer. Okay, so your question might say that, Bob called her on the phone and said, "Well, I don't know about this. Maybe would you do this?" You can always say that, oh, maybe this is not considered a counteroffer because it's a mere inquiry. However, if it is considered a counteroffer, then blah, blah, blah. So I think a lot of people, when they're doing MEEs, they'll come to a decision and then stop the analysis, right? Because this is a mere inquiry, then there's no contract, and then you stop. Okay, well, you need to write about more things, right? You have like 25 minutes to go and you want to write as much as possible in that 25 minutes. So continue the analysis. Even if it was treated as a counteroffer, then blah, 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 right? So just because you find a stop, an organic stop in your analysis, doesn't mean that you can then argue for the other side, right? Um, Output and requirement contracts in UCC world, I've seen a lot, and it's important to know the difference. So those are valid. Those are valid offers where a company is saying everything that I output this year, everything I create, you will buy, right? And the buyer will say, yeah, everything that you output that year, I'll buy. So if you're a stapler manufacturer and you manufacture 1 million staplers this year, I'll buy everything that you do. Everything this year that you create, I will buy. That's a valid output contract. And why is it valid? Because we know the amount, right? It's whatever you did that year. Or whatever you will do that year from January 1st to December 31st, whatever that amount is a definite amount that we know, and that is why it's a valid offer, right? So look for offers that have validity and have definition, as opposed to offers that are, again, mere inquiries or offers that are lacking certain terms where we're kind of confused about what's going on. And if that's the case, maybe there's no meeting of the minds. Right. So meeting of the minds is how you create a valid contract. If there's an offer, an acceptance and consideration, and the offeror and offeree know what they're doing, there is a meeting of the minds. But if there's not, where there's parties that are confused about what they're contracting for, and maybe we're going into mutual or unilateral mistake, then maybe we don't have a meeting of the minds, and then we don't have a valid contract. So that's an output contract. And a requirement contract is also valid in UCC, but it's kind of the flipped. It's the company saying everything that my company requires this year, I'll buy from you specifically. So if I work at Home Depot, does Home Depot sell staplers? I don't even know. If I work at Home Depot and I want to sell staplers to my consumers, all the staplers that I'm requiring this year, I'll buy from company S that is creating the staplers, right? So that's also valid because we know the definite terms, right? We know what that company needs that year. So output slash requirement, if your MEE has those in there, that is a valid offer, right? And so again, things might happen after that where now there's a counter offer or there's a valid contract form, and then there's modifications afterwards. Whatever that happens, that's a valid offer, and that's okay. For acceptance, we need intent to enter into a binding contract. We can accept in any reasonable matter actions unless words or actions unless it's specifically defined manner of acceptance by the offeror. So what does that mean? I can accept if I'm the offeree and I get an offer, I can accept in any reasonable way, right? So what's the reasonable way? I can either tell my offeror that I'm totally okay with that and thumbs up, or I can follow the terms of what that offer says, where the only way you can accept is if you go buy those paint buckets and then show up at my house on Tuesday. Then I would actually have to do that, right? I can't just call him and say, yeah, no problem, I accept. I'm going to actually have to do what the offer says in order to accept, right? So I would have to go to the store, buy the paint buckets and show up, and then I have accepted. So the difference between that is in bilateral and unilateral acceptances. If you have a bilateral contract, which is two parties, right? There's an offeror and an offeree. Um, there is a promise to start performance, and the starting of the performance is the acceptance, right? So if I'm contracting with a party and you have to go buy the paint buckets, once I buy the paint buckets, before I even show up at your house, right? And this again is if my offer is silent on how to accept, right? So if I just go do the thing that the offer said I should do, that is starting my performance and I have accepted, right? So compare that with unilateral, where there's only one party looking at an offer that's basically said to other people. And a lot of the times it would be like an advertisement for a lost dog. So if that's the situation and it says, "Hey, I have a lost dog. I'll reward anyone who finds them as $15,000, right? I'll give you 15K." Starting performance creates an option preventing revocation. So as soon as I go try to find the dog, I have created it's an option contract, and we'll get to option contracts. But there's no actual acceptance yet of this. It just merely means that the offer for $15,000 to the person who finds it is irrevocable. So as the people are looking around, the offeror, the person who put the stamp up on that telephone pole about this advertisement, cannot take it down and then move out of town. Once the people start performing and looking, he has created an irrevocable offer, right? He cannot revoke his offer. However, has not happened yet until you actually go find the dog, right? So finding the dog, which is completing the performance, is required for acceptance. So I know that can be a little bit murky, but just keep in mind that having an offer and then revoking the offer is different than having an offer that's irrevocable, which creates an option contract where you have the option to accept that offer when you do something. And the doing of that something is completing performance if it's a unilateral contract. And unilateral contract, again, is basically one party that is going to complete performance based upon another party's general offer to a large population of people. And you'll see that with like a lost dog sign, right? I'm not communicating that to a specific person. I'm just posting it and asking people to do something, and completing the performance would be the acceptance if it's unilateral. So again, to talk about option contracts, common law means if I had a common law contract and I had an option contract, I need separate consideration to keep that option contract open. So how that would work is if a party says, "Hey, can you paint my house on Tuesday? And I'll let you think about it for 5 days, to see if you want to actually do it or not," right? So the offer is open for this period of time. However, in common law, I need additional and separate consideration for that. So, separate consideration means that I want you to paint my house for $1,000. But I'll leave this option open for you for 5 days and I'll give you $50. Or actually, that party will give me $50 to keep it open, right? I need time to think about it. Let me give you $50. That's typically how it would happen. And that would create an irrevocable option contract. So in that 5 days, I'm the person that has the $50 now because I asked this person to pay my house and they have to think about it. I can't revoke my offer while he's thinking about it because the separate consideration was given. So compare that with the UCC merchant rules that if there is a signed writing with assurances that this offer is irrevocable, there's no additional consideration needed. So what does that mean? A merchant writes to another merchant, "I'm selling these widgets, 100 of them. Do you want to buy them for $500? And I'll leave this open for you, so you can think about it. Don't worry about it. You don't have to give me an answer now. You can think about it." And then my signed writing has something saying like, it will be, this is an option contract that will be irrevocable, right? Something like that. And if that's the case, then the other party, the offeree, the other merchant, right? Because this is a merchant rule, does not have to furnish additional consideration for this option to stay open. It can just be made in good faith, right? And so UCC, you'll see the pattern is a lot more lenient than common law in this regard. But if it's silent for how long the option is open, the default is 3 months, right? And no consideration is needed because merchants are just, people that can do this all the time, and we don't need to be furnishing small amounts of nominal consideration to each other as merchants. I'll just leave it open for a certain amount of time. If there's no specific time, it's 3 months, and then that creates an irrevocable offer that now the other offeree party can accept whenever, right? But if it's past 3 months, then you can make the argument that that's not a reasonable period of time for it to be open. Reasonableness is 3 months in UCC world. So the key distinctions that we'll go through is the mirror image and battle of the forms, which we have a slide on. There is something with silence for acceptance, and you have to treat silence as it's generally not acceptance because you have to communicate your acceptance to the offeror, right? You have to either reasonably communicate your willingness to accept or actually start performance or complete performance to accept, right? So if there's a party that's silent on the case, it's typically not acceptance unless there was prior dealings between the parties, right? Unless in the past the party has just never responded and it's fine because they'll just continue it as if he did respond, right? But be careful that you might see situations, especially with merchants, when there is a confirmatory memo that is sent saying, hey, we spoke on the phone. This is what we talked about. This is the contract that we want to enter into. And then if nothing is said after that, it's deemed as an acceptance, right? So silence might be deemed as an acceptance in certain situations. But typically silence is not because you actually have to communicate acceptance, right? Um, and so the last bullet is about mailbox rule, and we'll talk about that as well. So the battle of the forms in UCC, a lot of people get confused about this, but I think it's actually very simple. So we need merchants, right? Or this is a battle of the forms UCC, which is a movement of goods merchant rule. So if two parties are merchants, the offeror and the offeree, and you'll know they're merchants because they're a shipment dealer, they are a business owner, right? They are a factory product manager, whatever their title is. And again, if it's a gray area on your ME, you can always make the argument, right? Party A would be considered a merchant because they transact in the type of goods dealt with, or party A is not a merchant because he's a mere mom and pop shop owner and he doesn't really do this a lot. Therefore, he won't be bound by the merchant rules because of that, right? Just, tread lightly with the facts that you're given, but typically if you have someone who is a shipment manager or something that has the title that you're dealing in these types of goods a lot, you're a merchant. So for Battle of the Forms UCC, how this works is the offer or merchant sends an offer in the mail, and then there is an offeree merchant that sends something back in the mail, which is a response, right? It could be considered a counteroffer, right? And so basically we have two forms. We have the offeror form and then we offeree form with conflicting things, additional or conflicting things on there. And that's how you know this is a UCC Battle of the Forms situation, right? We have two different documents, we have two different versions of things, and we don't know which terms apply. So if the two documents or the two versions have different or additional, sorry, if they have additional terms, and what's an additional term? Party A says, can you please deliver these goods on Tuesday? And then party B says, yes, I'll give them Tuesday, July 12th. If that's the case, that's an additional term. Why? Because the first offer, the first version of this contract was silent on the date. It said Tuesday, but it didn't specify which Tuesday. So the response for July 12th is an additional term because there was no date. We added the date later. So that's considered additional because it's not conflicting or different, right? And we'll get into conflicting or different. But the additional term is also not material, right? The if they said Tuesday and then the next Tuesday is July 12th, that's the perfect excuse, right? So this is not materially changing the contract in any way. I'm not increasing the amount by $1 million. I'm not postponing the delivery by 2 years, right? It's not material to the transaction that we're dealing with. And the offeror, which is again how this works, is the offeror says, "Would you do it on Tuesday?" Offeree says, "Yes, Tuesday the 12th." And the offeror does not object to the Tuesday the 12th. Additional term is part of the contract. Done deal. Now we have a valid contract on delivery on Tuesday, July 12th, right? The alternative to that is if the offeror says, "Can you please deliver it on Tuesday the 12th?" and the offeree says, "Sure, I'll deliver it on Wednesday the 13th." Right? So now we have a conflicting term. We have a different slash conflicting term. And why? Because the first version had a date and the second version changed the date, right? So look for different and conflicting on changing something in the contract that was already specified, or conflicting something that is of a purpose that we're already talking about, right? And then you're just changing it. Like, so you'll see where your facts are different, if it's an additional or if it's a different and conflicting term, right? And we want to make sure we know the difference. Um, but then if we have a different or conflicting term, then the 12th and the 13th that are conflicting will be knocked out, right? So the knockout rule means that now we have a gap, right? We don't know the delivery date because we had two conflicting terms that knocked each other out. So once we have a gap, then I can fill that gap with the UCC gap fillers, which is on this bottom part. The UCC gap fillers is basically a hierarchy of things that are going to be added to the contract to make sure we know how to deliver these goods. The hierarchy is express terms in the contract are our top tier, right? So if for some reason in the contract somewhere it says the parties will always deliver on Tuesday the 12th, then we're going to do Tuesday the 12th, right? And the express terms in the contract say what we're questioning, right? We're going to follow it. If the contract is still silent on that and we have a gap, then I'm going to go to course of performance. Course of performance is the parties' repeated conduct under this contract. So when we sent the contract version back and forth, version one, version two, offeror, offeree, were there different terms in there that showed we want the 12, right? Was there something in a past version that we already confirmed on the 12, right? So that's the parties' repeated conduct in this actual contract. If we don't have the answer there, then we move to course of dealing, which is the pattern of conduct of these exact. So course of performance and course of dealing is the same parties, right? The only difference is performance is this contract, and course of dealing is prior contracts that we've done in the past, right? So 2 years ago, we contracted for something. I delivered it on the 12th of Tuesday and there was no problem, right? Maybe that would be a UCC gap filler. I'm going to put in the 12th because in a course of dealing, we've done this in the past, prior contracts between us, the same parties. And if we still don't have an answer, we're going to go to usage of trade, which is a default. Just regular practices in the industry can explain or supplement, but cannot contradict express terms, right? So your facts will tell you what the terms of the contract are. You don't have to make them up. However, if you had something where there was a battle of the forms, there was a knockout because of different or conflicting terms, and now we have to UCC gap filler, I want to make sure that my grader knows I know all of this. I know priority, course of dealing, course of performance, and usage of trade. I know the definitions and I know how to apply them to my facts, right? So it's super crucial that we can learn the definitions of things because we never know when it'll pop up in our MEE. And all of this is so many points, right? We can just type away all our black letter law and then apply our facts, but those are all points that are up for grabs. Um, Mailbox rule is also something that people are like worried about. First and foremost, I want to make sure everyone's on the same page. When you're talking about mailbox rule, you're talking about letters sent in the mail, right? Written memos or letters sent in the mail. As soon as I have a mailbox rule problem, a mailbox is involved, right? So if someone's on the phone and talking orally or there's a discussion between the parties in person, I don't have a mailbox rule problem, right? Until the party sends the offer in the mail or until the party sends their acceptance in the mail, then I have a mailbox rule problem. So that's the first thing, is if there even is a mailbox rule, to come up here, and your facts will tell you that. But this makes sense to me, right? People are confused about mailbox rule, but it makes sense. When the offer is sent and received by the offeree, so I go into my mailbox and I open up my mail and there's an offer in there and it says, "Will you paint my house for $1,000?" I am going to write back and say, yes, I will paint your house for $1,000. And then I send my acceptance in the mail, right? Back to that offeror saying I've accepted. Once I intend to accept by placing my acceptance in the mail, a contract is formed on dispatch, right? So acceptance is effective on dispatch and then a contract is created. So why does that make sense? Because the offeree's intent is to accept, and once they intend to send it in the mail to the recipient, then they have accepted, right? So acceptance is effective on dispatch, on when it's sent, because that's when the offeree intended to accept, right? Once it was sent. However, if you have an acceptance and then a rejection, it's different, right? I intended to accept, I sent it in the mail, but then I changed my mind and I wanted to reject. Well, what's the problem with that? The acceptance is effective on dispatch, right? Our general rule. Once I have accepted, I can then not reject. I can't reject a contract or I can't reject an offer once a contract is created, right? And a contract is created when acceptance is dispatched. So if you see parties that are sending things in the mail and a party accepts dispatch first, right? Dispatch effective on acceptance dispatch effect, oh my God. Acceptance effective on dispatch first, then they send a rejection second. No bueno. It is an acceptance first, and therefore a contract is created. If it's the reversed and the rejection is sent first and then the acceptance is sent, this is one of those unfair issues where we don't know, right? I rejected, and then I changed my mind and accepted. So when that happens, it's the first received by the offeror, right? And in the third tier, in that situation, this is confusing. We don't know who wants what. We're just going to say whatever the offeror received first, right? In that case, the offeree was confused. They had a rejection and then an acceptance. At this point, we're just going to have the offeror receive the first thing. And what if he receives the acceptance first? Great. A contract is formed. And if he receives a rejection first, okay, then there's a rejection, right? And so that's the first received. And again, the third tier is if once they're sent in the mail, right? I have a rejection sent and then an acceptance sent in the mail. We don't know where they're going and which one the offeror will receive first. That would be the situation in the third tier. But the general rule is acceptance is effective on dispatch, right? It's the intent of the offeree to accept once they put it in the mail. There is the main difference with common law and UCC is when we have the mirror image rule, which I talked about before, where in common law your offer and acceptance needs to mirror image each other, right? So I need the exact terms. I don't have any changes in there. If it's not a perfect mirror, then I have a rejection and a counteroffer, right? And what does that do? The rejection and a counteroffer creates the offer acceptance in the offeror now. So I was the original one that sent the offer, and then I received an acceptance that was different. So that's a rejection and a counteroffer, right? I'm in common law situation here. I'm in painting my house. Now the original offeror has the power of acceptance, right? So now it's flipped where the person who was supposed to accept that sent an acceptance with different terms is now the new offeror, right? And so just keep in mind that your facts might have that, and then you need to apply the law differently of who's the offeror and who's the offeree. Um, but that's when we are entering into a contract with formation, right? We have the mirror image rule, and then with UCC, which is goods, we don't have mirror image, right? We have it can be different, right? It can be made in good faith. If there's different terms, they're not automatically out, right? It doesn't automatically mean it's a rejection and counteroffer. It's just another way that the person who is supposed to accept can maybe add additional terms for the contract to be fully formed, right? So that's at formation. But with modifications, there's a stark difference between common law and UCC. For common law, we already formed our contract, right? We have a valid contract, and now we want to change something after the fact, right? We want to modify. So when we're trying to modify in common law, I have a pre-existing duty rule. I need additional consideration, or I do not have a valid modification. So What does that mean? I contracted you to paint my house $1,000. We agreed, acceptance. You're supposed to be coming on Tuesday. When you show up on Tuesday, you look around and you said, your house is actually really big. I can only do this for $2,000, right? That's a violation of the pre-existing duty rule. There's no additional consideration. And what would additional consideration look like? Listen, your house is really big. I can only do this for $2,000, but I'll also paint your shed, right? So that means that one party is getting more consideration. They're getting 2,000 instead of 1,000, and the homeowner also has additional consideration where they're also getting their shed built, right? So there needs to be additional consideration on both parts in order to not violate the pre-existing duty rule. And the pre-existing duty rule says, I had a pre-existing duty to paint this house for $1,000. I can't just change that after we entered into a valid contract. I can't just modify this without adding more money or adding more like services that I have to do. Like I need additional consideration or it's invalid. The difference for that is UCC does not need additional consideration for modification. So as long as it's made in good faith. So if I'm contracting for widgets, I need 100 widgets by next Tuesday, and the party says, okay, that's fine, but I can actually only give you um, like we're trying to modify it after the fact, that's fine, but I can actually only send them on Wednesday, right? So there is no additional consideration on one part because one party is actually at a detriment where they have to get it a day later and the other party isn't paying anymore or having it cheaper, right? What would be additional consideration if it was cheaper, right? So fine, I get it on Wednesday, but at least I pay a little bit less, right? In UCC, modifications after a valid contract is formed can only be done in good faith, right? There's no reason that we need additional consideration. Mere good faith is enough for the modification to be valid, right? So that's a stark difference between common law and UCC. You need additional consideration for modifying a common law contract, and you merely need good faith to modify a UCC contract. So again, UCC is a little bit more lenient in this regard. However, typically UCC has these good faith requirements a lot that pop up. So if you forget on test day, just default to UCC wants good faith, right? That's typically how it happens. Um, Also keep in mind that you can modify an existing contract to now be under the statute of frauds, right? So if we initially tried to contract for widgets for 400, which again, statute of frauds needs writing contracts in writing if it's over $500, right, for UCC goods. But if we contracted for on the phone for $400 worth of widgets, we're not in statute of frauds world, right? Even though we're on the phone and we're orally speaking and it's not conformed to a written memorandum yet, it's only $400, right? So we're not in statute of frauds yet. However, once we enter into a valid contract and then one party tries to modify afterwards, where they give me a call 2 weeks later and said, hey, I know we had a contract for that, but is there any way that I can buy more and we can do it for $600? Then I need it in writing because I created a statute of frauds issue by modifying the contract later. So that might pop up. Um, and again, the general rules consideration is required for common law. And past moral consideration is not valid, right? And so what does that mean? Well, you did this good deed for me 2 years ago. So I'll just take you up on I owe you one type thing. No, you need additional consideration now, right? You need one party to give less or more money, and you need another party to do more or less services, right? And we talked about statute of frauds a little bit, but there's a mnemonic my legs, which a lot of big box likes to call it. Marriage contracts that cannot be performed under within 1 year, land, executorships, goods, and suretyships. The other ones kind of speak for themselves. Just know that executorships is in the context of an estate. So if someone passes away, their estate might owe debts. The executor is able to pay debts on behalf of the estate, but those have to be in writing. So how do you see that on your MEE? If you're getting a contract that's regarding debts of the estate, that's a statute of frauds issue, right? And then you're going to have to tell your grader the statute of frauds means that certain contracts must be conformed to writing or else they are invalid. The purpose of statute of frauds is to make sure that there's no fraudulent transactions where there's good, where there's contracts that we need to know the definitions and terms of, right? And the statute of frauds applies to my legs, and you would have to repeat what my legs are and make sure that your grader knows. Listen, I know all the statute of frauds, right? So even though that this is a land contract, I'm also going to say, so I can get more points, I'm also going to say the other parts of my legs, right? And it doesn't have to be a super long analysis into marriage or anything like that. Just say the mnemonics, right? I'm going to tell my grader I know marriage, year, land, executorships, goods, and suretyships. However, this is a contract for land. I'm going to apply the rules regarding land contracts. Suretyships come up a little bit where it's the promise to pay another's debt, where a friend of yours will tell you, hey, I owe $10,000 to this guy. And your friend's like, listen, like you've been a great friend to me. I'll pay that on your behalf. I'll pay your debts. If that's the case, then your friend has to put that in writing because a oral promise to pay another's debt is not valid. Um, so once I have a statute of frauds problem, I need it to be in writing. And when I have a writing, I need my writing to be valid. And so what does that mean? The contract, the offer that we are in writing now needs to have essential terms, right? So if I'm in a common law contract and I have a written contract or a written offer, I need that to have essential terms. I need the price of whatever service or whatever real property that we're buying. And if it is real property, I need a description of the land. And so if I don't have those two things, then I don't have essential terms. And then the statute of frauds might apply because that's not a valid writing, right? Now I have a contract for a house. It has to be in writing. There is a writing, but it lacks the description of the land. If that's the case, I don't have a valid contract because it falls within statute of frauds, right? I need my writings to have these essential terms if writings are required. And for UCC, the essential term is quantity. Right, so it's not price. So I can contract for 500 widgets and the price is silent, right? And then if that's the case, maybe I have a UCC gap filler, but we need the quantity, right? I need to know how much I'm contracting for, how many widgets I'm buying. Um, and they're always widgets. Like, what even is a widget? But this is what I talked about before, where you can take something out of the contract of the statute of frauds by contracting for something that is not susceptible to statute of frauds and then changing it to then be susceptible to statute of frauds. And so that would happen with a merchant confirmatory memo where there's two merchants on the phone and they're contracting for goods way over 500. You know, I need 10,000 widgets for $1 million, and there's nothing in writing it yet. We're only on the phone. That's a big statute of frauds issue, but how is that resolved? Well, one merchant sends a confirmatory memo to the other merchant that details their description of the conversation on the phone. That will bind the recipient unless they object in 10 days. And then that takes out of the statute of frauds. We have a written memorandum. Hopefully, it has the essential term of quantity on there and signed by the party to be charged, meaning the party that is to be held to their end, right? So if one party is saying, oh, we don't have a valid contract, that's the party that is going to be charged, right? So just know that I want both parties to sign it, right? Let's make it really easy here and have both parties sign it. That would be the best case scenario. And so that binds the recipient unless objected to in 10 days. And then we talked about modifications. I can modify a contract to then fall into the statute of frauds, so just look for that. And again, statute of frauds is a defense to creating a contract or enforcing a contract. But I want to make sure that everyone understands that there's more than just the statute of frauds, right? There's other defenses and we'll go through them, but statute of frauds is the most popular defense, right? And that means contracts that need to be in writing. Um, and so we can take contracts that are susceptible to statute of frauds, which still have no writing, and make a really good argument on why this contract should still apply, right? So in these situations, I still don't have a writing. I failed to do a writing, and we just spoke on the phone, and these contracts that we were trying to create falls within the statute of frauds, right? It's goods over 500. This is we're talking about a real property. If that's the case, then if I fully perform this contract, that takes it out of the statute of frauds, right? And so why does that make sense? Oh, I'm calling you on the phone. Can you please paint my house for $1,000? I show up the next day. Actually, that's a bad excuse because that wouldn't fall under statute of fraud. So let's say I need you to do work on my house. I need you to build another wing of my house, and it'll probably take like a year and a half, right? Then that's a contract that cannot be completed with under 1 year. That must be in writing, but we only talked on the phone. So then a year and a half passes, and you did all the work. Thanks. So there's no way the homeowner can now say, "Oh yeah, we didn't have a contract. It wasn't in writing." That's not fair. So full performance takes the contract out of statute of frauds. And that would be the argument that you make in your analysis where it says here the party fully performed. Therefore, the argument would be that it takes it out of statute of frauds. And therefore, there is a valid contract. And then the contractor that did the wing on my house needs to be paid, right? It's a fully performed contract and we have to hold up our end of the bargain. And if I don't pay him, I'm in breach, right? So that's full performance. For land, we have a part performance option where we can do two of the three: payment, possession, or improvements, right? So if I don't have a writing, I ask to buy your house, you say yes, I move into the house. If I pay you, possess the house where a reasonable person would possess, or I do improvements to the land, right? Two out of those three things, then the person who moved in can make a great argument that I'm taking this out of statute of frauds, right? I part performed in this land contract, even though it's not in a writing. I did two out of these three ones. I'm taking this out of statute of frauds. So that would be a great argument if you saw that in your facts. With UCC, if I have specially manufactured goods, again, this would be goods for over $500. Let's say I call this manufacturer of hats. I want a specific custom hat with my name on it, and it's going to cost me $5,000. That needs to be in writing. It's for a good over 500. However, we never had a writing, and now I'm trying to argue that we didn't have a contract, right? So the person who created the hat would say, well, why would I create this if we didn't have a contract? Why would I have this embellished hat with your name on it? So specifically manufactured goods, and I can't go resell this in the market. No one would want this, right? It has your name on it, and so I'm unable to sell this hat on the market. That takes this out of a statute of frauds issue, and therefore creates a valid contract that one person might have breached if they didn't pay. Um, and the suretyships too, we also spoke about. And then again, goods that are paid for or accepted are enforceable to the quantity that are paid for or accepted anyway, right? So if we contract for goods of widgets over for $1,000 and then you send me the 50 widgets, but I only accept 35 and I only pay for $500 worth of it, then depending on what happens after that, I would have to understand if I'm still in statute of frauds or not because it's only enforceable to the part that I paid, right? So if you didn't give me what I wanted and I only paid for a portion of it that's actually 400, right? It would be $400, then the statute of frauds doesn't apply because we only contracted for $400, right? So it's the amount that's paid for or accepted to that quantity. Um, Switching gears a little bit to parole evidence. So people like parole evidence because it kind of reminds them of like quasi evidence and quasi I'm trying to get in a statement into evidence like a if I'm in like a criminal law MEE where there's a admission of guilt or something like that. But in contracts, it's very easy to issue spot a parole evidence question because your facts will tell you I have parties that are entering into a contract. And now, after the contract's already created, they're trying to bring in a statement that I made when we were 2 weeks into negotiation on getting a fully performed contract of a different statement, right? So we have a fully performed contract that I'm going to build a barn. And then I have a parole evidence question where, well, we had a conversation 2 weeks before I signed the contract that you said you were also going to build a silo and you didn't build the silo. So now I'm trying to add that conversation we had into evidence now, right? We're in a court proceeding, we're in a trial. I'm trying to enter that into evidence to prove that we did have that agreement and that you should have built a silo on my property. So parole evidence is prior or contemporaneous, which is 2 weeks ago we spoke on the phone and then 2 weeks later I signed it, or at the signing, you're gonna also build a silo, right? As I'm signing the contract, I'm asking the party, you're also going to build a silo. He goes, yeah, I'll build a silo and I'm signing it. That's contemporaneous to signing the contract. So prior to or contemporaneous, written or oral. So he could also slip me a note as I'm writing it, and then it will say, "I promise I'll build a silo," right? Whatever that might be in your facts, it doesn't have to be only spoken word. So even though it says parole, and parole kind of sounds like the Latin term parole to speak, but it can only be, it doesn't have to be only oral. It can also be written, right? So keep in mind that parole might come up if it's a written memorandum attempting to be introduced into evidence, right? So when I have a situation like that, it's a twofold analysis. The first is I have this parole evidence. Can it be admitted? Well, let me see. Is my contract completely integrated? So, what's a complete integration? This is a full contract. There's no ambiguity. There's no terms that are missing. This is a complete manifestation of both of our intent to enter into a contract, and all the terms are in here. How would we know if it's completely integrated? It has a merger clause, right? That would be a great option. If there's a merger clause that says this is a complete integration of the parties' needs and wants, and there's nothing else that we left on the table, and everything is in this contract, something like that. This is a final and exclusive writing. If that's the case, no parole. Sorry, I cannot bring in parole because it's completely integrated. I can't bring in a conversation we had 2 weeks ago because that's not fair. We have a completely integrated contract. We have a merger clause. This is final and exclusive. I can't switch it up now from that little small 5-minute conversation we had on the phone, right? Compare that with partial integration. If I have a partially integrated contract where it's not a complete manifestation of our intent, maybe there's a term that's missing. Maybe there is a open discussion on one of the pages where the parties will then figure this out at a later date, right? If it's not a partial, if it's not a complete integration, it's a partial integration, right? And these arguments you make are just arguments, right? So on your MEE, if you see a parole evidence issue, you're going to be arguing party A is going to want it to be a complete integration. Party B is going to want it to be a partial integration, right? And then you're going to come up with the arguments on why it's one or the other. It's great to talk about both, though. Talk about both sides because you'll get the most amount of points. So if it's a partial integration where this isn't a complete manifestation of our intent, I can add parole to supplement or add, but not to contradict. Does this sound familiar? Because it's kind of like Battle of the Forms, right? I can bring in this parole evidence in a partially integrated contract to add or supplement a term where it was open-ended for Tuesday, and my parole evidence says that we confirmed on a telephone conversation it was Tuesday the 12th. Therefore, I can add this, right? I'm adding or supplementing our contract. I'm not contradicting. However, if the parole evidence says, oh, well, we only contracted for 500 widgets and the actual written contract says 1,000 widgets, that's a contradiction, right? We have two different quantities, we have two different terms, we have two different prices. That's a contradiction. I cannot bring in parole evidence, right? No parole evidence for contradictions, only for supplemental and add if it's a partial integration. So first I figure out, is this completely or partially integrated? If it's completely integrated, can't bring in parole. If it's partially integrated, I can bring in parole with a limitation that I can only bring it in to supplement or add. I cannot bring in parole to contradict. However, even if I have a completely integrated contract, even if I have a partially integrated contract, no matter what I have, if I'm trying to bring in parole for the right-hand side of this slide for the exceptions, it's always admissible. I can bring in parole for any of these reasons to clear up an ambiguity, to prove a condition precedent. So to prove that something has to happen, there was a condition to performance, right? To prove defenses to formation, like if someone had a gun to their head and there was an oral telephone conversation, oh, well, she had a gun to her head when she signed it. I can bring that in because that's a defense to formation. Or to correct reformation, to correct like a scrivener's error, right? Where I was supposed to put in a certain term and my secretary typed it in incorrectly. If that's the case, I can bring in parole evidence for any of these exceptions. So I don't care if it's partially integrated. I don't care if it contradicts a term. If I can make the argument that it's being brought in for this exception, I can bring it in. It's okay if your MEE facts are all over the place. If they're all over the place and you think it might be this and you think it might be this, great, argue for it. Party A thinks this, party B thinks this. However, there's an argument that it's clearing up an ambiguity. No one knows what Tuesday means. No one knows what the terms all tires means. And if you've seen that MBE question, you know what I'm talking about. But that is clearing up an ambiguity. Okay. So the tip at the bottom, I think, is important as well. Parole evidence is bringing in a prior to or contemporaneous written or oral statement to then change something in this already existing contract or to prove something in this already existing contract. Modifications happens afterwards. So if I have a telephone call that happened 1 week after I signed the contract, that's not a parole evidence. That's a modification because it happened after the contract was entered into. So look for conversations or written memorandums that are sent before and after the final contract is signed. Okay. We have defenses to formation, which are always fun. But these are, these can come up a lot. These are kind of like bullet points where I have two slides specifically on like the ones that are the most highly tested. But the one that I've seen actually a lot is capacity, where if there was a minor that contracted with an adult, right, to enter into a contract, it's voidable on behalf of the minor. What does that mean? If I run a summer camp and I have high schoolers that are working as camp counselors, I am basically entering into an invalid contract because I can't contract with minors, right? Generally. Obviously, there's state law that changes things and you can work when you're 16, but not to worry about that. And for purposes of your MEE, if a party is contracting with a minor, that's technically invalid, right? I can't contract with a minor. They don't have capacity to enter into this contract. And if that's the case, after the minor turns of age, right? So typically it's 18, but if your facts tell you they contracted when they were 17, but then the minor turned 18 and continued the contract, right? So if he continued to work for the summer camp after the age of 18, then he has confirmed that he wants to be bound by the contract as an adult. So keep in mind that it's up to the minor once they turn the age of majority to either continue or to void it, right? So that means it's voidable by the minor. And so voidable means that it's not void at the onset. It's not a void contract when we enter into it. It's voidable by the minor because there might be an argument that capacity impacted his ability to make decisions and to enter into a contract. So it's voidable by the minor once he becomes an adult, right? So he becomes 18, he looks at the summer camp and goes, I hate it here. I'm not going to work here anymore. I'm voiding this contract, right? This is voidable by me. I'm exercising my ability to void this and I don't want to work here anymore. That's fine, right? Then now he's voiding it because he entered into it when he was a minor. However, if he turns 18 and then he continues to work there, that's an argument that he has solidified the contract, right? He has created an enforceable contract despite the minority that his age and his incapacity when he was a minor when he entered into it. Now that he's an adult and he continued to work there, he has created a valid contract and he might have lost his ability to void it, right? Because he continued to work there. However, if it's a contract for necessities, where even if there's a minor contracting with an adult for necessities, meaning a minor is a tenant in a rental house and they're paying for rent to their landlord, right? That is a valid contract. And it cannot be voidable by the minor because he's contracting for necessities, right? A roof over his head, right? So rent would be like a shelter. The minor can't say, we don't have a contract, right? I'm a minor. I can't contract with you. We're contracting for necessities. Yes, you do. You cannot void this, right? So look for like, typically it's like employment, um, or it's maybe you hired a high schooler to come and paint your house and then he said that I don't want to do this anymore, then it's voidable. Then it's voidable, right? Then we don't have a valid contract and even if he breached, I can't hold him to that breach, right? He's voiding that contract and that's on me. I entered into a contract with someone who was a minor. Um And if you're drunk, also, that's also has maybe come up sometimes. It's voidable by the intoxicated person. If the non-intoxicated person knew that they were going to take advantage of the intoxicated person, right? So I get my friend super drunk and I'm like, hey, can you just sign this piece of paper to say that you're going to deed me your house because I really like your house and I want to live there? And she's like, sure. And she signs it. And I knew she was super drunk and I wanted her to do that on purpose, then my friend can void this contract if she wants to, right? But keep in mind, it's voidable. She can void it if she wakes up the next day sober and regrets her decisions, or she can just let it continue, right? So voidable means that the parties have an option to stop it, an option to void it if they want to. Compare that with void, where there is no contract. It was void at the beginning. There is no valid contract for us to even act upon. And then, take a look at these other defenses. But impossible and impractical, I've seen that in situations of like illegality as well. So we enter into a contract and we're trying to bring in a chemical overseas, right? And then that chemical becomes illegal, right? The government passes a law, you cannot have this chemical in the States. Now our contract is illegal, right? It's impossible to enter into this contract. It's impossible to perform this contract. When that's the case, then it would be void, right? And then both parties are maybe there's an unjust enrichment argument, but both parties are basically stopped from performing. Also, if it's illegal when it was entered into at the onset, like I'm entering into a contract to like kill somebody for a hitman, that's void at the beginning, right? Both parties know that that's illegal. We do not have a valid contract, and even if it becomes possible or impractical in the future, then it becomes void, right? Because we physically cannot do this, right? We cannot perform. And just because a contract is considered to be void does not mean that damages can still be awarded, right? Because we might have a unjust enrichment where one party bought a lot of cargo ships in preparation of this, and then it's at no one's fault. Maybe there's an argument to be made that he should get the money back for those ships, right? And maybe your facts will tell you that one party knew it was going to be illegal and the one party didn't. Then you can make the argument that way. Um, so misrepresentation and fraud can come up in a lot of these instances where you have a contract that is being negotiated with and the party is expressly not saying something or expressly saying something false to another party to get them to justifiably rely on their statement to then enter into the contract, right? So keep in mind that this would more likely than not, 9 times out of 10, come up with real estate transactions, right? So I'm entering into a contract to buy a house, and the seller of the house tells me, hey, I just want to let you know that the roof is totally fine, right? Don't even worry about it. It doesn't leak. It's perfect. And then the other party's like, great, I'm so happy you told me that. The buyer says, I love that. I hate leaky roofs, and I'm gonna buy this house because of that. When you have that situation, it's a false statement of fact, right? And so in that situation, that is probably fraud, right? So it's probably fraud because the seller knows they're lying. So if they know they're lying and they still make that assertion, trying to get the other party, the buyer, to buy the house, that is fraudulent. So if that's the case, then I have fraudulent misrepresentation, and you can put the definition of fraudulent misrepresentation in your black letter law section when you issue spot it in the facts. Compare that with just regular misrepresentation that can be negligent. And it's all about the party's intent, right? So general misrepresentation is just negligent because maybe the party didn't inspect the property, right? So maybe there was no inspection done, and the buyer is saying, "Oh, like, is the foundation fine?" And the seller says, "Yeah, I mean, like, I got an inspection done 3 years ago, and the inspection was fine." But maybe he should have gotten a more recent inspection, and then that inspection would have shown foundation issues. That's probably just merely negligent, right? He didn't do the inspection. He probably should have. And he didn't say this with intent that it was false. He just was negligent. That's still a misrepresentation. So it's still misrepresentation, and the innocent party that relied on that misrepresentation or fraudulent statement can now void the contract if he wants to, right? So it's voidable by the innocent party that justifiably relied on the statement. How do you know if they justifiably relied? And again, on your MEE, I'm just picturing it now. Misrepresentation is this, fraudulent misrepresentation is this. Innocent party has to justifiably rely. Justifiably rely means that they would not have entered into that contract if it wasn't for that statement. Keep in mind that that is the definition of justifiably relied, where I trusted you. I would have not entered into this contract if you didn't promise me this. That was the reason I entered into it. It was material to me making this decision. And therefore, I justifiably relied. And now I'm the innocent party. You screwed me over. I can void this if I want to, right? So it's not void at the onset where it's invalid at the onset. It's voidable where we can still continue it. And if I want to continue it, like whatever, he lied to me, but I'll let bygones be bygones, then it's avoidable. Keep in mind that that is a fraudulent statement to a fraudulent misrepresentation of a statement or omission that's about like a latent defect or something that the party knows is untrue and justifiably relying on that, they enter into the contract, right? Right. That is the beginning bullet point, but the fraud and the factum is void. And why is that void at the beginning, right? Ab initio, at the onset. It's void at the onset because in this situation, the party doesn't even know what they're signing, right? So this is fraud in the factum, meaning that the party is just signing an autograph and he actually is signing the deed to his house to this other person. You can't do that, right? So if it's they cannot appreciate the significance of what they're doing. They cannot understand that what they're signing, right? So if a blind person is getting tricked into signing something, that's fraud in the fact and where they don't know what they're signing, then that's void at the beginning. There's no meaning of the minds and it's completely void. Where it cannot be enforced, right? So voiding a contract means it's not enforceable. There might always be an adjustment, an unjust enrichment argument to get some parties' money back. But keep in mind that the general damages are not available if it's an unenforceable contract, if it's a void contract, or if it's voidable and they exercise their ability to void it, then it becomes unenforceable. Mutual mistake is, I'll just, quickly go over this because I think it kind of speaks for itself. But mutual mistake is where both parties are mistaken about a basic assumption where we're both like the person who's buying the diamond and the person who's selling the diamond don't understand that it's fake, right? And so maybe in that situation, if it was like a jeweler, they should have known that it's a different diamond than it would be. But I'm getting into the weeds here. They're both mistaken about a basic material issue of this item that we're, whether it be about the value of what it is, exactly what it is, where it's located, and it's a material effect on the exchange, right? We're entering into this contract because of this material situation, because of the price, because of what it is. And the party seeking to avoid it, and again, who's the party seeking to avoid it? Your facts will tell you that Bob and Jim tried to contract for this diamond, and then it turns out the diamond's fake, and Bob wants his money back. Who is the party seeking avoidance? Bob, right? So the party that's seeking avoidance did not assume the risk. Your facts will tell you that he trusted the jeweler. He maybe did his own research that created this belief that he was buying the right thing because the jeweler held himself out on the internet of being this dependable guy. I don't know, I'm just making it up, but he did not assume the risk. Therefore, we have mutual mistake where it's voidable by the adversely affected party, the party that bought the diamond, and it wasn't a real diamond. We have a mutual mistake, right? So both parties both parties were confused about a material effect, and therefore it's voidable by the adversely affected party, but it's not void at its onset, it's avoidable. So the parties can continue it if they want to, but the adversely affected party can void it. The unilateral mistake is a little bit different because this is where I have an innocent party and a non-innocent party. And in this situation, I have a party that knew the error. They knew or should have known the error. And honestly, with the diamond thing, this probably comes up better in unilateral mistake because the jeweler is in a position to know or should have known that the diamond was fake. And maybe with mutual mistake, that'll be between like lay people, right? Like there's an estate sale. My grandmother had this ring. I'm just going to sell it to this person in this garage sale. I don't know if it's real or not. And you don't know if it's real or not. That would be like a mutual mistake. But a unilateral mistake is where one party should have known, knew or should have known, and the other party, relied on their detriment or just did not know and they weren't in a position to know. But therefore, it's a unilateral mistake because the adversely affected party is now at a loss, right? And so what that would mean is I have a unilateral mistake where the non-mistaken party can then void it, right? And so that's the situation, kind of like a mutual mistake where the adversely affected party, a mutual mistake can void it. It's the mistaken party can void it in a unilateral mistake if these situations come up, though. So keep in mind that you might have a unilateral mistake, but the non-mistaken party didn't know that the other party was relying on that statement, right? So the jeweler could say, hey, I'm selling this and we're not really sure what it is, but just take a look and let me know what you think. And then the mistaken party looks in and says like, oh, yeah, this is fine. I'll buy it for $5,000 and it actually is like worth $1. Maybe they didn't have reason to know or should have known of the error, right? So your facts might change the situation here, but as long as you have your black letter law down and then you can apply the facts really well to the black letter law, then you'll be able to make an argument for both sides. And so in computational errors, this is how we know a party knew or should have known, right? So if there's a missing zero that changes the amount by over $10,000, obviously it's an error, right? So the mistaken party is using that, and the mistaken party is at a detriment, and the non-mistaken party is using that to their advantage. So therefore, the mistaken party can void that if they want to. Hey, I'm not going to go through with this because it's obviously wrong, right? This is a unilateral mistake. However, if it's a small change in computation and it's 15, but it should have been 17, then that's totally fine if the other party didn't know that it was supposed to be 15 or 17, right? So if they talk on the phone, they say, hey, I'll send you over a decent offer for this diamond. It's a very reasonable offer. And then they send a $17,000 offer, but internally in their company, they accidentally said 17 when they meant to say 15. Too bad. The person that's receiving that offer has no idea that they accidentally said 17 instead of 15. It's still a number that's around the same, and that party is going to prevail, right? It will not be able to be voided. You're going to have to perform in that contract, and it's enforceable. So another stark difference between UCC and common law is common law looks at breach as material or minor. UCC looks at breach as I need perfect tender. What's the difference? Perfect tender means I need all of these goods to be exactly conforming with how we spoke about it, with how we contracted for. Even if one of these 100 items that we contracted for is defective, then all of it breaches perfect tender, right? So the entire delivery, the entire shipment, even if one item is non-conforming, that makes the entire shipment a breach of perfect tender. And that means that the buyer who is taking a look at their shipment and sees things that are wrong can either accept everything and say, hey, it's fine, I'll just accept everything, and then we have an enforceable contract, I have to pay you. Or the buyer can reject everything and say, hey, this is wrong, I'm rejecting it, and I'm going to sue you for breach. Right? Or I'll give you an opportunity to change it and get me back the correct items because I'm a nice guy. But I don't have to do that. I can reject all and sue you for breach. Or I can reject some. I can reject the one that's wrong and accept all the others, and then I can only sue you on that one small rejection. And by sue, I mean collect damages for that one wrong item. However, if I receive my shipment that's incorrect, but there's also a little note from my seller that says, sorry, I gave you the incorrect shipment. I'll get you the good ones in about 2 days, but I just want to let you know I'm giving you seasonable notice of the defect, and I'll cure it. Don't worry about it. That changes my options. Now I can't sue for total breach because he gave me a seasonable notice of the defect. There's no breach yet until he tries to redo it, and then that second shipment is also defective with no assurances in there. Then I can sue for breach. But keep in mind that your fax might give you like a little note from the buyer that says, hey, I know these are non-conforming. Sorry about that. I'll get it to you in a little bit. That's not a breach yet. So, your facts might tell you that. Um, However, in common law, I have material versus minor. Material means this is a substantial issue. I am getting deprived of my benefit of the bargain. So, material breach is I want you to come and paint my house and you don't even show up. If you don't even show up, I don't even have my house painted. I can sue you for total damages. I can sue you for not holding up your end of the bargain in this valid contract. The difference is for minor breach, that's if you painted my whole house and the door is the wrong color, right? If that's the case, then the minor breach is only for the door. I can still sue you for the damages resulting in the door being a different color, but I can't sue you for the damages of the total contract because I did get the majority. I did get the benefit of my bargain, at least somewhat, getting the entire house painted. It's just a minor breach. So the difference is that in minor breach, I can sue for the defect, but I can't recover damages for the entirety of the contract. But I can recover damages for the entirety of the contract in a material breach because I lost my benefit of the bargain there. Also, keep in mind that if it's a minor breach, I just missed the door. Sorry about that. Then the homeowner still has to pay the contract price, right? Granted that they can maybe change it a little bit because of the defect of the door, but the homeowner is still responsible for rendering payment. So if the homeowner does not render payment and they're like, I'm going to suspend my payment because you painted the door wrong, then the homeowner is in breach because they're supposed to render payment because a minor breach does not suspend payment. You still have to pay, but you may be able to get the defect back. Compare that with material breach. If it's completely wrong, he never showed up, then I don't have to pay. Obviously, I don't pay him. He didn't show up. So as the homeowner in this situation, my obligation to pay is suspended because of the material breach by the breaching party. Okay. And also, it's important to know the difference between breaching and non-breaching party. So the breaching party is the party that didn't do what they were supposed to, right? They painted the door wrong. They didn't show up. They delivered non-conforming goods. That is a breaching party. I never paid, right? That's a breaching party. Then there's a non-breaching party that is basically the innocent actor that just like doesn't do anything. But you might have two breaching parties, right? You might have seller doesn't pay and buyer doesn't deliver. You might have that and you have to figure out who had the right to do what, and then therefore you'd be able to award damages to the innocent party, right? The more innocent party, but always keep in mind that parties have a duty to mitigate, right? So that will always just go to the calculation point of damages. That you can see, and they'll be able to quantify it in your MEE. If they were going to mitigate damages and then he wouldn't have lost 50K, he only lost 40K if he mitigated damages, then maybe he can only collect the 40K. He can't collect the 50K because he didn't mitigate, right? Parties always have a duty to mitigate further loss. So continuing here, and I know we're going a little bit over time, but I just want to complete everything. Um, Anticipatory repudiation is where there's a valid contract we entered into. I'm waiting for performance very patiently, and I get a call and he says, "Hey, I cannot come. I something came up and I cannot paint your house tomorrow. There is no way I will not be there." All right, that's an unequivocal statement of intent to not perform before performance is due, right? I'm supposed to come tomorrow and I'm not going to show up. If that happens, I can sue you for total breach, right? So I can sue you for total breach. I can suspend my own performance, which is paying you money. I can sue that. I can treat that as a total breach. I can suspend my own performance, Or I can treat the contract as rescinded and say, no problem, we'll reschedule another day. Or I can urge you to perform. So there's options that the non-repudiating party has, but just keep in mind that typically in your MEE, they're going to want to sue for breach, right? So just keep in mind that if there's an anticipatory repudiation, which is an unequivocal statement that I'm not going to perform, the other party can sue for total breach. It's not a mere doubt. Hey, there's traffic. I don't know if I can make it, but I'm really going to try. And, I'll keep you updated. That is not an unequivocal statement that they're not going to perform. That's a mere doubt or an expression of difficulty. Hey, this is really hard. I didn't know that I'm going to have to get on the ladder or whatever. That's just a mere doubt. I cannot sue you yet for total breach if it's a mere doubt. If that's the case, I can ask you for adequate assurances, saying, okay, you need to prove to me in the next 2 hours that you'll be here on time, right? So I need an adequate insurance in writing, or I'll suspend my performance, right? And so what does that mean? If you can't give me adequate assurances, then I can sue for total breach. So if I have a reasonable ground for insecurity, it's not a unequivocal statement yet, right? Because if it's an unequivocal statement, I cannot perform, I'll sue you for total breach right now. But if it's a mere doubt or an expression of difficulty, and I have reasonable grounds to request assurances, I'm going to request assurances from you. And if I don't get them from you in a reasonable period of time, and reasonable period of time, sometimes no more than 30 days, and you don't have to memorize these numbers totally, just know that it's a reasonable time, then it's treated as a repudiation. So if I did not get those adequate assurance from you and reasonable time has passed, I am going to sue you for total breach. It's a total repudiation. So the way that this will be tested is there's a contract that was already entered into by two parties, and then one party either telephones or sends a letter to the other party expressing doubts, issues, or an unequivocal statement that I cannot perform. If that's the case, I'm going to go through my entire anticipatory repudiation definitions, everything here. I'm going to say what an anticipatory repudiation is, what an equivocal statement is, what mere doubts are, what my options are, what adequate assurances are, and then I have a really, really great MEE paragraph on my black letter law, and then my analysis would be great because I'll just apply the facts and then I'll conclude, right? So anticipatory repudiation, I want one of those on my contracts essay because there's so much to write about and it's kind of easy to remember. So damages is like the end of the analysis for a lot of the MEEs, right? So we're entering into a contract, there's formation issues, maybe there's defense issues. Then I have performance or breaching parties. And then once I have breaching parties, which I always do on my MEE, I have to award damages. So damages, a lot of people get confused because they're like, oh, well, there's numbers involved. Don't worry about it. Forget the numbers for now. What you have to do with your black letter law is say expectation is the default. And what is expectation? It's what the parties expected, right? So I'm going to award expectation damages to the non-breaching party, right? So obviously the non-breaching party, the innocent party, gets the damages. They get the money. They get the award, right? Because they didn't do anything wrong, right? In this situation. So they're going to get the expectation of their bargain, right? A fully performed contract. So that means if I if I expected to make $100,000 profit from this sale and you breach, I get my $100,000. I get my full expectation. And therefore, it's because I'm the non-breaching party. Expectation damages are able to be calculated where it's not speculative of what I could have made. We know at the onset of entering into the contract that I would have made $100,000. So that way, if you breach, I get those $100,000, right? It's a fully performed contract. If there's a situation where we don't know what the party would get with expectations, we don't know what they would get with a fully performed contract, then I'm going to do my backup damages, which is reliance damages. Reliance damages is basically like, I don't know this man. Like we never met. So Reliance puts the parties back where they would have been if they never entered into the contract in the first place, right? So it's as if the contract was never entered into. Reliance is basically from zero, right? I'm not giving you expectation of a fully performed contract. I'm giving you reliance as if we never met, right? Well, just the status quo would go back to normal. And how that works is I contracted with this party to paint my house, and he said, sure, no problem. And he went to go buy some paint buckets, and then he showed up on that day. And I said, hey, I have my family over for a dinner. I can't do it today. And he's like, well, I'm booked the rest of the year. I can't do it. I breached because I didn't allow him to perform. And if all other facts are whatever in this situation that I'm making up right now, his reliance damages would be basically to get the money back that he spent on the paint cans, right? It's before we entered into. He would have expected, and maybe now that I'm thinking about it, this is probably not good because he would have expected to make $1,000, and that would have been a definite amount of money. And therefore, maybe reliance wouldn't be awarded because it's not speculative. But in the situation, maybe like, oh, can you come over and work on my kitchen? And I don't know how much it's going to be. I have a pretty big kitchen and there's a lot of things that I want. And he said, no problem. I'll buy some rulers and measuring tape and screwdrivers. I'll buy some tools to come fix your kitchen. And I don't know what I would have made because we didn't talk about a price. But maybe the damages were speculative. That way, if you breach and you don't allow me to go into your kitchen and work on it, I'll just get back what I bought, right? All those tools will be given back to me, all the money that I spent, because we're treating this as if we never entered into a contract in the first place, right? That's the backup. That's damages are too speculative. I don't know what I would have gotten in a fully performed contract. We don't know. So I'm going to use my backup. I'm going to use reliance. And then restitution, I brought up a couple times as I spoke. That prevents unjust enrichment, right? So this situation is basically where we have like a quasi contract. We don't really have a true meeting of the minds. We have one party maybe just merely inquired for another party to do something, and maybe there's an issue with my formation, maybe there's an issue with my offer or acceptance or consideration. Something in my formula is not working, and maybe there's no meeting of the minds. However, one party decides to go buy something. The one party decides to let an offer say no because he thought that the other offer was going to go through, and then he loses money. That way, we're preventing unjust enrichment. So that means it's a value of the benefit conferred. So what that would be, and I've seen a situation like this where a painter comes to the house and he knocks on the doors. He says, hey, I'm doing some painting in the neighborhood. I'll paint your house for $1,000. And the homeowner just stands there and is just like looking at him. And then he's like, all right, I'm just going to start. And then he starts painting the house and the neighbor says nothing. Then in that situation, he had his house painted. He never stopped him. He could have if he wanted to. Maybe there's no contract for him. It's like a quasi contract. It's almost like he never accepted in a valid way. Silence is not an acceptance. However, in this situation, he got a painted house, right? So if this restitutionary award was not awarded, then the homeowner is unjustly enriched. He has a painted house for free, and the painter painted it. He should be paid for the value of the benefit conferred. In that situation, we're going to award restitutionary money on a restitutionary theory. So keep in mind, we have expectation as the default. If damages are too speculative, we have reliance as a backup. Parties never met. And then we have restitution to help with unjust enrichment. And then with all of these, I can always add on incidental and consequential. And like I spoke about in the beginning, incidental is the cost of transport, inspection, holding goods overnight in a freezer if they're perishable, things like that. Or consequential is a foreseeability test. Consequential is only valid if the parties knew what it was before they entered into the contract with each other. So what does that mean? Listen, I have a deal that's going to go through in 1 week. I'm going to make $500,000 from that deal. If you breach, I'm going to have that deal impacted by me and I might lose on that money. And then they breach. If that's the case, I can sue for the consequential damages of the $500,000 that I would have made if you didn't breach. And the only reason I can is because we talked about it before. It's foreseeable to you because I spoke about it before we entered in this contract and you knew I was relying on you to do something. And if you didn't, I would have lost money on something else. Okay. Liquidated damages is only awarded if it's not like treated as a penalty. And the reason why liquidated damages are even a thing is sometimes contracts are very speculative. Like I don't know what we would have made in the future, or I don't know what the damages would be to me in the future if you breached. So therefore, we're gonna just put a number there. Like let's say if something goes wrong or a party breaches, they'll pay the non-breaching party $1 million, right? So the liquidated damages clause in the contract would be if there's a breach, the breaching party has to pay the non-breaching party X amount, right? That's like a liquidated damages clause. It's going to be um, only enforceable if it was difficult to estimate what the damages would be at the beginning and the amount is reasonable, right? So maybe this is a high-end contract, $1 million is reasonable, or if it's a mom and pop shop that's buying staplers, maybe $1 million is not reasonable, right? And that would be in your MEE analysis of what you think would be reasonable and not reasonable. Um, so buyer's remedies and seller's remedies in UCC. Just to boil this down into something digestible, and you can feel free to, pause and read the slide on your own, but buyers typically cover, right? So what does that mean? I contracted with a seller to give me something. I'm waiting for that to come in the mail because I have to open up my store tomorrow and I'm waiting for these shirts and I'm opening up my store tomorrow and the shirts are never delivered. I have to go buy new shirts from someplace else. I have to cover and find additional items because in good faith, I need this without delay, right? I need the shirts. I'm opening up the store tomorrow. The way that I can get damages on if the seller breaches in that situation is the cost of cover is returned back to me, right? So what we would have gotten with a fully performed contract, if I was supposed to pay you $5,000 for the shirts, and then um, the cover was $17,000 for the shirts, I'll get the difference, right? Cover minus contract plus incidental and consequential, right? So I would have paid you $15,000 anyway, but I had to go get these new items and then it kind of screwed me over. So now I can get the difference of that plus incidental and consequential, right? That's like the basic rule for cover of what a buyer can do if the seller breaches. Um, and if I don't cover, maybe there's an argument that I should have, right? I have to mitigate damages as much as possible, and mitigating damages might be covering. But if I don't cover, then it's typically the market price at the time of breach. So whatever those shirts are, a market price where I was supposed to get them, that would be how damages are calculated. Okay. And then we have specific performance too, is good to note that if there was a good that is hard to be valued because it was specifically made for you, right? The hat with your name on it. I can't really go out into the market and buy a hat with my name on it, right? I'm waiting for this specific good that was specifically created for me. Then I can't really use the cover damages. I can probably only get damages that we can figure out of what the cost of that hat is. Hopefully, it's not too speculative because then maybe I just get reliance, right? Just thinking about what my MEE would talk about. But then I can always ask for that actual good back, right? So there's always an equitable, specific performance recovery, which is if it's unique good, I get those unique goods back, right? Those are unique to me, and that's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for money. I'm looking for those unique goods, especially if it's a real property. Real property is always considered unique. If I'm contracting for that house, I really want that house, right? I don't want the money for the contract that falls through. I can always be awarded money on a secondary basis. But the main purpose of specific performance is to get the unique good to the person, to the innocent party. The seller's remedies, if the buyer breaches, if the buyer says, I want to buy 15,000 shirts, and then he never gives the money, and the seller now has all these shirts for no reason, what am I going to do with these things? They should be reselling, right? So they have to make a commercially reasonable sale. And if that's the case, then they're able to sue for the difference between the contract price and the resale price, right? So if there's a difference there, then the seller can recoup that because of the buyer breach. The buyer should have bought this and didn't. So now the seller has to go resell it, and the difference between that they can recover. And again, like for the buyer's remedies, if there's no resale price and he didn't do that, maybe he should have mitigated, then it's market price at the time that tender was supposed to be given, right? So if it's supposed to be delivered on Tuesday, that's when tender was due. It's market price at what those shirts were valued for on Tuesday. Lost volume seller is kind of unique, but that's like a car dealership where, I'm trying to buy a Tesla and then I never show up on the day I'm supposed to pick it up. That volume seller, right? That car dealership seller would have made a sale to me and then also would have made a sale to somebody else, right? So because I breached, because the first buyer breached, the seller could have sold that car and another car because he has an unlimited amount of volume, right? An unlimited amount of capacity. So technically, the seller lost two times profit because now he has this car he has to get rid of, and no second car took the place of that, right? So I know that could be a little bit confusing, but just know that if it's a volume seller like a car dealership or like inventory for equipment at a house, right? If I have like a billion refrigerators in a warehouse and a buyer breaches and never picks up the fridge, I lose on that buyer and I lose on a second buyer that I would have sold if the first buyer did not breach, right? So these are the differences between buyer remedies and seller remedies in UCC, but your facts will point you to where you need to know. So again, I know there's a lot of material in this PowerPoint, but it would be crucial to understand that your MEE is not going to talk about every single thing on here, right? It's going to have maybe one or two slides at issue. You'll remember it from this PowerPoint, and you'll be able to put the black letter law down and get it high score. So assignments and delegations come up a little bit, so I'm just going to briefly go over it. But if you're assigning something, you're assigning the rights to do it, right? So if I am going to paint someone's house, but then I assign that to somebody else, a second painter, then that second painter has the rights to, I'm sorry, if the assignment is to paint someone's house and the homeowner says, don't paint my house, paint my neighbor's house, then they're assigning the rights to the neighbor's house to get their house painted, right? So they're standing in the shoes of the original assignor who is saying, my house was supposed to be painted, but I'll give this painter to you, and then therefore you get the right to have your house painted. The alternative is a delegation. That's where the painter is delegating duties. So the painter is supposed to go paint the house and says, I actually want my friend who is another painter to do it instead of me. And he'll get money for it because, like, I want my friend to have money or something like that. So that would be a transfer of duties. So duties are an obligation to paint, and the rights are the ability to be paid for it, right? So the transfer of rights is I'm giving you the rights to be paid for this transaction, this assignment. So I have a little bit of information on the bottom of this. That's, I think, easy to read that because I know people get confused with assignment and delegation. But just know that if you have an assignment, which is the transfer of rights, and if you have the delegation, which is the transfer of duties, two different things come up where we need to know who gets in trouble if there's a breach, because there will be a breach, and who they can recover from. Okay, so I think it would make more sense if you just read this on your own, because it's a little bit in the weeds and I want to make sure I have enough time to go through the rest of the slides. But just know that you'll see this where party A and party B have a contract, and then party C is going to either get the rights to be paid or have to paint the house. So there's a right or there's a duty, and then there's a third party coming in. That would be your MEE fact that points you to this is assignment or delegation, right? And then similarly to that, we have third party beneficiaries. So if I have two parties contracting and there's a third party floating out there, who is that third party? Are they getting rights or duties assigned or delegated to them? Then maybe I'm an assignment or delegation. Are they supposed to be doing something in the contract or getting the rights to be paid in that contract? Then it's probably assignment or delegation. If the third party is benefiting from the contract, then I'm in third party beneficiaries. So what is a benefit from a contract? Well, I'm looking at, there's two parties that are contracting with one another to build a school, right? And then the third party beneficiaries are all of the homeowners that are adjacent to the school that have kids. So all those people who have kids are like, yes, we really want our kids to be in this new school. We are third party beneficiaries to this contract, right? We're in privity of this contract, so to speak. However, do the homeowners have the right to enforce their rights if that contract falls through or if something happens with that contract? Do those homeowners with the children have any rights, have any stake in the game? They would if they are an intended beneficiary. And so, what does that mean? An intended beneficiary has enforcement rights when at the time that they entered into the contract, the party A and party B, maybe the town board and the developer at the time that they entered into the contract, then they knew they wanted to benefit the homeowners. They would say, hey, this would be really good for the homeowners and their young children. We really want to build a school that benefits them. They are an intended beneficiary at the time the contract was entered into. If that's the case, then an intended beneficiary has rights, and an intended beneficiaries can sue if the contract falls through, as long as the rights are vested. The rights are vested if these three things happen, which is on the bottom left. If they learn of the contract, so in this situation, they are an intended beneficiary, right? They were contracted, they were thought of when contracted for, and they wanted to enter into the contract for the purposes of benefiting them. If that's the case, and the homeowners learn of the contract and agree to the contract and materially rely on the contract, or file suit for the contract, then they have vested. So when they vest, they either sue, learn of the contract, or materially rely on the contract. And maybe materially relying on is that they don't enroll their kids in another school nearby because they're waiting for this school to be built. So they materially relied on it. Therefore, they vested. And if they vested, they can sue on the total contract. They can sue for breach and they can recover. Um, and so just keep in mind that I want to make the difference. I want to make sure I know the difference between intended and incidental beneficiaries. So an incidental beneficiaries is a merely incidental benefited party, right? So at the onset, they entered into this contract together, but they were like, I'm just trying to build, maybe it's a library. Like we just want to build a library for the nearby people. And then, a bookseller in a different town is like, oh, I'm going to be really benefited by this library because then I can sell my books. But however, the intended beneficiary were the public, right? We want the public to have a free library. And this bookseller is just merely incidentally benefited by it. They weren't thought of when we were entering into the contract. They're just merely incidental. That bookseller has no rights to enforce the contract, unfortunately. It can only be the intended beneficiary once that beneficiary's rights have vested. And then on the right hand side, I have novation, which is the substitution of a party. Which, okay, we are supposed to be doing something. We have rights in this contract. We have duties in this contract, and we're going to agree to substitute one party for another party. And if that's the case, that's okay, as long as all the parties agree to the substitution. And it's not in contrast with anything intended in the contract. So, for example, if I hire a specific person to come and teach my daughter how to play the piano, there's a specific musician, I would never agree or have a novation to release that piano teacher from getting a different or substituting party to come and teach my daughter how to play piano. I asked you to do it, right? So that would have a situation where the novation would not work. And then an accord and satisfaction, I've seen come up in like cashing a check, right? So if there's a dispute for the amount owed, and like let's say we entered into a contract and you were supposed to pay my house for $1,000, and we're debating on what the money is. Okay, after it's done, they said, "Oh well, where's my 1,000?" I'm like, "Well, you didn't do a good job. I'm gonna actually pay you $800." There's an issue here, right? So there's a different amount of price that we're trying to work out. If that's the case and the painter's like, hey, I'll accept the 800. I know I effed up. Don't worry about it. That would be an accord, right? So we are agreeing to different terms. Right now, I'm agreeing to an $800 check instead of an $1,000 check. The actual satisfaction of that would be if I wrote an $800 check to him and he cashed it. If he cashed the $800 check, he has suspended the original duty, my original duty to pay him $1,000. Therefore, he can't cash the check. He can't accord and then satisfy by cashing. He can't do that and then go sue me for the $1,000. Okay, so that's like how I would see an accord and satisfaction being asked about for an MEE. Um, so again, good faith dispute plus cashing a check, that's an accord and satisfaction. So accord is we're agreeing to new terms, we're agreeing to new performances, and then the satisfaction is that actual performance happens or that actual term is done, the check is cashed, then we cannot sue on the original contract, right? We can only sue on this difference that we both agreed on. If like I never sent or the $800 bounced, then he can only sue me for the $800, right? Um, I do have a quick slide about warranties. The main issue with this is merchantability and fitness for a particular purpose. So if this is coming up in UCC world a lot, if goods are specifically being bought because they have a particular purpose, right? I'm buying these goods because of this specific purpose that I'm trying to, get across, then I can sue on that particular purpose, that warranty, when it does not meet that standard. And then same thing with merchantability, which is a lower standard of merchantability. It's just I need these fit for ordinary purpose. I'm gonna buy these blenders from a distributor, and I got to make sure these blenders actually work, right? And then for fitness for a particular purpose would be like maybe there's a specified reason that these are bought for, there's a holiday coming up and they have to be in accordance with, the colors of this holiday. They're fit for this particular purpose. And if they show up with different colors, then I'm going to be able to sue because it's a breach of warranty, right? So if there's a warranty where there's an express warranty where someone promises that this is going to work, right? These products will work. And that's exactly what you want them to do. Don't worry about it. Like you have my full belief that these will work. That's an expressed warranty. An implied warranty are for these merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. If these are breached, then I can sue for breach. And how do I sue for breach? The value as warranted plus minus the value as delivered, right? So I get the difference. If you expressly tell me that this product is going to do something and it doesn't, or if it's implied that the product is fit for a particular purpose or is fit for an ordinary purpose and doesn't, I get the difference. And how do you calculate the difference? Your MEE will tell you what the numbers are. And if they don't tell you numbers for some reason, then you can always just write it in value as warranted minus value as delivered plus incidental and consequential. Okay? So just make sure you know the difference between express, where it's actually spoken. It's not puffery, where, oh yeah, it's the best on the market, or but it's no. When you buy this, it will exactly do this. When you buy this, people will be able to, open up this software and it'll work perfectly. If that doesn't happen, then you can sue for damages, and you are a non-breaching party. And then that person who promised you the software works is a breaching party, right? And then implied warranty is you don't have to say it, but it's implied that this item is merchantable, right? It has an ordinary purpose and it's fit for that. Or it's fitness for a particular purpose, right? So if it's supposed to be done for this specific reason and your facts will tell you it, I'm running out of brainstorming power here, then those are implied warranties, which are not, expressly said, but you can still sue on them the same way. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. Hopefully that was helpful for everybody. I put my email here. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask me, and you don't have to just limit your questions to contracts. I tutor for all the subjects, so let me know if there's anything that you want me to expand upon, or if there's any sticking points or anything like that. I'm happy to help. So again, hope this was helpful, and I will see everyone in the next lecture. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Bye bye.